Sometimes, justice doesn't come from shouting the loudest, it comes from standing still while the truth does the talking. This is the story of Malcolm Rivers, a man who came to enjoy a movie and left as a symbol of quiet strength. In a world where assumptions scream louder than facts, Malcolm reminded everyone that dignity doesn't flinch, even when soaked in buttered popcorn. This is not just about one theater, one lie, or one Karen. It's about what happens when the cameras roll, and the truth finds its spotlight. Now, let's begin. The air was warm and alive with neon. Peachtree Street pulsed with laughter, voices, and the hum of Friday night freedom. At the entrance of Prime Vista 3D cinemas, couples posed beneath the marquee like movie stars in waiting, and the scent of buttery popcorn floated through the air like a siren call. Malcolm Rivers stepped out of his ride-share vehicle, straightened the cuffs of his navy linen shirt, and took in the familiar scene with a measured calm. He wasn't in a rush. He never was. At 6'3", with the kind of presence that made people either curious or nervous, Malcolm had long since learned to command space without saying a word. His skin, rich and dark, caught the fading sun like polished obsidian as he entered the cool lobby. No one at Prime Vista knew his name, and that's how he preferred it. Despite being one of the anonymous financial backers of the film premiering tonight, Malcolm didn't want recognition. He wanted a good seat, a quiet moment, and a story worth escaping into, F7, center row. But the story that would unfold tonight wouldn't be the one on screen. As he waited patiently in line for his popcorn and water, a sharp voice pierced through the hum of conversation behind him. "Can you move up a bit?" It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in the tone of entitlement. Malcolm turned his head slightly. A white woman in her 40s, blonde curls squeezed under a pink visor, stood behind him with a child, a boy no older than 8. She wore disdain on her face like foundation, and her words followed suit. "Some of us don't have all night." Malcolm said nothing. He simply stepped forward, letting her pass her own judgment in the silence he left behind. But the boy's voice chimed in next, loud enough to echo. "Mom, why is he even here? This place costs a lot." The mother chuckled and leaned down, not whispering, not even pretending to hide the insult. "Sweetheart, everyone comes here now. Even the ones from the other side of town. Isn't that something?" It was subtle. Not violent. Not explicit. But it landed. Still, Malcolm didn't react. He accepted his popcorn and water from the teen behind the counter, nodded graciously, and walked away, toward Theater 6. The boy giggled again behind him. "He looks like that guy from the crime show who got arrested." "Oh, you're right," Karen laughed. "They do all look alike, don't they?" A chill ran beneath Malcolm's skin. Not fear. Not even anger. Exhaustion. The kind of generational exhaustion that wraps around the ribs like barbed wire. But he pushed forward, deeper into the theater, because tonight was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be his. But the show hadn't even started. And already, someone had mistaken his piece for permission. The dim glow of the projector washed over the audience like a tide, casting long shadows and quiet anticipation. The previews had just begun, flickering with overproduced trailers and soaring orchestral scores. Malcolm settled into seat F7, the one he always chose, center row, dead center. It was his little corner of silence, a refuge from the noise of the world. But the world, it seemed, had followed him in. Barely 10 minutes into the film, a steady, deliberate thumping began against the back of his seat. Not a random nudge. Not a child being restless. No, it was rhythmic. Intentional. Designed to irritate. He took a breath, turned halfway, and said quietly, "Excuse me, ma'am. Your son's been kicking my seat. Could you ask him to stop?" Karen didn't even look up from her phone at first. When she finally did, her expression was soaked in condescension. "He's 8, she said, as though that excused everything. "Kids move. Don't take it so personal." She smiled, thin and venomous. Maybe you just need to relax a little. We're all here to enjoy the movie. Malcolm stared at her for a moment, measuring her words, weighing the intent behind the sugary tone. But he only nodded. Right. Just hoping to enjoy it in peace, that's all. Karen turned to her son. Switch seats with mommy, honey. I'll handle this. The boy obeyed, slipping into G8, now beside her. Karen took the spot directly behind Malcolm, G7, her knees suddenly inches from his back. He exhaled, knowing exactly what that handling would mean. A few more minutes passed. Just long enough for him to let his guard down. Then a sharp crunch, popcorn rained down, speckling his shirt collar and neck. He didn't turn around. Another piece followed. Then another. The salty smell of butter mingled with indignation. Malcolm brushed it off quietly, his fingers tight with restraint. Karen chuckled. Some people think buying a premium seat makes them important, she whispered loud enough for at least 2 rows to hear. But I think good seats should go to people who actually appreciate art. Her voice cut through the quiet like a scalpel. He said nothing. Not because he was afraid. Not because he was unsure. But because he knew what this was, bait. And he had no intention of giving her the reaction she was trying to provoke. Still, it continued. Her knee jabbed the seat again, hard this time. He flinched forward slightly, his water bottle tumbling from his hand and rolling under the seat. The third jab broke something invisible. He turned, slowly, and looked her dead in the eye. That's enough, Malcolm said. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It was firm, resolute, and sharpened with clarity. You've been kicking my seat all night. You've thrown popcorn at me. You've disrupted this entire row. I asked politely. Now I'm done being quiet. Karen blinked dramatically, her mouth forming a perfect little O of faux outrage. Oh my God, are you threatening me? Her voice shot through the theater like a fire alarm. This man is standing over me and yelling. I feel unsafe. Someone get help. He's scaring my child. Heads turned. A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. Phones lit up, catching the aftermath of a confrontation that hadn't happened, at least not the way she painted it. Malcolm hadn't even stood up. But the way Karen screamed, you'd think he was a monster. Don't come any closer, she shrieked, even though he hadn't moved. I have every right to protect myself. Then, in one swift, theatrical motion, she lifted her half-full tub of popcorn and dumped it over his head. It was so quiet in the theater, the butter hitting fabric sounded like rain. Malcolm sat still. Popcorn clung to his hair. Butter streaked down his collar. The people around them stared, mouths open, frozen. One person whispered, did she really just? Yes. She had. A flashlight beam cut through the dark as 2 employees entered the room, followed by the theater manager in a red blazer. We're going to need to pause the film, the manager said into a walkie-talkie. The screen froze mid-scene. Lights lifted halfway. Reality intruded. Karen jumped up immediately, clutching her son. It's him, she yelled, pointing at Malcolm. He screamed at me. He intimidated me. My son's in tears. He's threatening us. Malcolm didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence, soaking wet and stained, said everything. Around them, murmurs of dissent began to stir. She threw it at him. Unreal. But the manager had to follow protocol. Sir, ma'am, he said cautiously, I'm going to ask you both to step outside while we sort this out. And just like that, Malcolm was escorted from the theater like a man accused, all while the real villain walked beside him, cloaked in crocodile tears and false victimhood. But what she didn't realize was this. The truth had already taken its seat, and it had a much better view than she did. The hallway outside Theater 6 was a world apart, sterile, humming with the buzz of fluorescent ceiling panels, and devoid of the warm murmur of popcorn-crunching moviegoers. Malcolm stood in the middle of it, his shirt soaked through with artificial butter, kernels clinging to his collar like a mockery of peace. Across from him, Karen paced dramatically, cradling her son, her voice pitched high and tremulous for all within earshot. "He screamed at me," she repeated for the third time. "Right in front of my child. I felt threatened. I had to act." The manager stood between them, visibly uncomfortable, eyes darting from Malcolm to Karen like a man caught between conflicting alarms. Two young staffers flanked him, clutching tablets and radios, unsure of who was the problem or how to proceed. Malcolm didn't move. Didn't speak. His eyes locked on the manager, unblinking, unmoved. "You have cameras in the theater, right?" Malcolm finally said, voice low but commanding. The manager blinked, caught off guard. Yes, of course. For safety. We log every show. Then pull the footage." Karen scoffed beside him. "What is that going to show? You towering over me? Glaring like a lunatic?" Her voice took on that syrupy southern drawl, sweetened venom. "I didn't raise my voice," Malcolm replied, evenly. "And I didn't move from my seat. But I'm done defending myself against someone else's imagination." The words sliced through the hallway like a scalpel. The manager turned to his staff. "Check the last 20 minutes. Playback Theater 6. Bring it here." One of the staffers darted off. Silence fell again. A few onlookers, patrons who'd stepped out for a bathroom break or to follow the drama, hovered along the walls, eyes wide, hands half raised with phones. "I was in F5, came a voice, soft but firm. An older woman in a gray cardigan stepped forward, her silver-framed glasses catching the hallway light. She looked directly at the manager, then at Karen. "That woman's been harassing him since the preview started. Her son kicked his chair non-stop. She threw the popcorn." Karen's face twisted, almost comically. "Excuse me? I don't even know you." "No," the woman replied, "but I saw you. And I'm not afraid to say it." Malcolm met her gaze, and for the first time that night, he felt the weight shift. Not because someone believed him, but because someone saw him. Minutes passed. Then the staffer returned with a tablet in hand. The manager took it, tapped the screen, and began to watch. His expression changed slowly, eyebrows rising, mouth tightening. He leaned closer. Rewound. Played it again. Then, wordlessly, he turned the tablet so that Karen could see. There it was, her son kicking the seat. Her switching places. Her face contorting into a cruel smile. Her whispering insults. And finally, the popcorn, dumped from above like a bucket of shame. The manager exhaled, deeply, and turned to her. "Ma'am," he said, voice carefully controlled. "The footage is clear. You and your son repeatedly disrupted Mr. Rivers. You threw food at him. At no point did he raise his voice or act aggressively. In fact, he asked you to stop, politely, multiple times." Karen's mouth opened. Then closed. Her face flushed pink with something between rage and disbelief. "This is unbelievable," she snapped. "You're just taking his side because of how it looks." "No," the manager replied, his tone hardening. "I'm taking the side of what's on camera. Which you seem to have forgotten exists." The hallway shifted again, this time, decisively. Whispers turned to stares. A young man in the corner muttered, "Man, this is wild." Karen's son pulled on her arm, confused now, uncertain. The power she'd wielded like a sword was slipping fast, melting just like the butter down Malcolm's back. The manager turned to him. "Mr. Rivers, I want to personally apologize on behalf of our entire staff and this establishment. You should not have been treated this way. Malcolm didn't nod. Didn't thank him. He simply stood taller. An apology is a start, he said quietly. But I didn't come here for pity. I came to enjoy a film. The staffer leaned into the manager's ear, whispering something urgently. The manager blinked, then looked at Malcolm. Mr. Rivers, he said, more formally now, I didn't recognize you before. I've just confirmed, you're listed among our premium patrons, and one of the investors in Nova Rebellion. The air thickened. Karen stiffened. You helped finance this film? Malcolm turned his eyes on her, not with triumph, but with precision. I did. The silence after that was brutal. The manager recovered quickly. Let us make this right. We'll get you a fresh shirt from our promo booth, escort you back to your seat, and ensure no one else disrupts your experience. Karen's eyes darted between the floor, the staff, and the crowd. The confidence was gone. The story had flipped, and she had no script for this version. Malcolm didn't speak to her. Not directly. He didn't have to. He nodded at the manager. Let's do that. And as the crowd in the hallway parted to let him pass, shoulders squared, head high, dry shirt in hand, every pair of eyes followed him. Karen remained behind, shrinking with each second. Her final whisper barely reached the wall. I didn't know who he was. But by then, it didn't matter. Because the world already did. The soft rustle of audience members settling back into their seats returned as the projector buzzed to life. Theater 6 was no longer just a room screening a blockbuster film. It was a courtroom of the silent, a place where judgment had already been passed, not by shouting, but by watching. When Malcolm re-entered, guided by the theater manager and flanked by 2 employees, a ripple of quiet respect passed through the rows. No one clapped. No one said a word. But heads turned, eyes followed, and something subtle shifted, acknowledgement. Not sympathy. Not performance. Something deeper. People knew what they'd seen. F7 remained empty, untouched, waiting for its rightful occupant. Malcolm, now in a clean promotional shirt bearing the name of the film he'd helped fund, Nova Rebellion, nodded once to the usher and made his way back to his seat. The woman in F5, the one who'd spoken up in the hallway, gave him a reassuring glance. He returned it with a nod, nothing more. He sat down, carefully this time. No tension in his shoulders. No popcorn to brush away. No laughter behind him. As the lights dimmed again and the opening credits rolled, Malcolm let out a slow, steady breath. His hands unclenched. His jaw relaxed. But while the theater may have returned to quiet, the real story was just beginning, and it wasn't the one on screen. A few seats over, in F9, a teenage girl who had been recording from the moment Karen started shrieking was uploading a video. She had captured everything, the false accusations, the popcorn, the calmness of Malcolm's response, and his quiet exit. Now, as the spaceship in the film streaked across the stars, her phone screen blazed with the words. Black man gets harassed by Karen at Prime Vista Cinema, she lied, he stayed calm, cameras don't. She posted it to TikTok and Twitter before the opening scene was halfway through. She added a caption that echoed something her grandmother used to say. The truth don't need to shout, it just needs to stand still long enough to be seen. By the time the film reached its midpoint, the video had already crossed 100,000 views. By the time the credits rolled, 2.3 million. The next morning, it had gone viral. Civil rights activists reposted it with commentary. Lawyers weighed in on false accusations. Cultural critics dissected Karen's weaponization of fear. Social justice threads spread the footage like wildfire, calling it another reminder of what being black in public still meant in America. Malcolm's name wasn't tagged, not yet, but his image had become a symbol. A still shot from the video, him, motionless in the aisle, popcorn clinging to his shoulders like ash, was already being called the new face of dignity. Karen's face was a different story. By noon the next day, someone had identified her. A name, a job title, a suburb just outside of Atlanta. Her Facebook vanished. Her LinkedIn was deactivated. But the internet never forgets. Her employer, a regional office for a luxury real estate firm, released a statement. We do not condone any form of racial harassment. The matter is under internal investigation. Online sleuths uncovered that she had boasted about her son's elite private school in several now-deleted posts. By Monday, rumors were circulating that the school had launched its own inquiry into her behavior and whether the incident violated its values. Karen, who had been so loud in that dark theater, now found herself silenced by her own echo. Malcolm, meanwhile, said nothing. He gave no interviews. He posted no tweets. He didn't comment under the trending hashtags, though hashtag F7, hashtag Karen at the cinema, and hashtag cameras don't lie were all trending nationally. Because he didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking for him now. But that didn't mean he was hiding. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday evening, Malcolm returned to Prime Vista. This time, he wasn't alone. His twin nieces, wide-eyed, 10 years old, giggling in matching jackets, walked beside him, clutching small bags of gummy bears and cherry soda. They weren't here for a fight. They weren't here for justice. They were here for Nova Rebellion. As Malcolm entered the lobby, the same teenage girl who had filmed everything that night stood behind the concessions counter. She recognized him instantly and straightened up. "Mr. Rivers," she said, warmly. "F7 is ready for you. We made sure of it." Malcolm smiled, soft, gracious, but not theatrical. "Just real." "Thank you," he said, placing a hand gently on his niece's shoulder. "Appreciate that." They made their way into Theater 6. The space was familiar now, not because of trauma, but because of triumph. The people who saw him this time didn't whisper suspicion. They whispered respect. A couple even clapped, softly. He didn't stop. He didn't wave. He simply nodded and took his seat. The screen glowed to life. His nieces leaned into his arms. And for the first time in weeks, Malcolm allowed himself to disappear, not from the world, but into a story. His story. Their story. Ours. The opening sequence of Nova Rebellion thundered through the theater, stars exploding, heroes leaping into battle, and hope flickering like firelight in a galaxy torn apart. Malcolm sat still in seat F7, flanked by his nieces, whose eyes sparkled behind their oversized 3D glasses. Their little legs swung freely above the floor, bouncing with every beat of the action. But it wasn't just the movie that had changed. The air inside Theater 6 felt reverent. No one kicked seats. No one whispered insults. No one laughed at the wrong moments. Malcolm didn't need to check behind him anymore. The story had shifted, not just in the plot but in the atmosphere, a kind of unspoken acknowledgement that something important had happened here, something bigger than buttered popcorn and a spoiled evening. And outside these walls, the storm kept building. The video of Karen's meltdown had been picked up by major outlets. CNN ran a short segment titled, "When Cameras Speak Louder Than Accusations." Trevor Noah riffed on it in his monologue, "Popcorn? Really, Karen? That's your version of self-defense?" The clip drew laughter, but also discussion. Conservative commentators tried, briefly, to spin it. "We don't know the full context," they argued. But then came the security footage. Then came the eyewitnesses. Then came the silence from Karen herself. Because what could she say? The footage showed it all. She hadn't just attacked a man, she'd attempted to ruin him. She'd cried wolf in Dolby Digital surround sound. And Malcolm had responded not with rage or retaliation, but with restraint. And in today's world, restraint has become revolutionary. 2 nights later, Malcolm received an unexpected email from the board of Nova Rebellion's executive producers. A private screening was being held at a museum in D.C., a closed-door affair for cultural leaders, investors, and select press. They wanted Malcolm to attend, not just as a backer, but as a guest of honor. He almost deleted the message. He didn't care for the spotlight. But then he remembered his niece's faces, the awe when the starship soared, the pride when people nodded at their uncle like he mattered. So, he booked the flight. The museum's screening hall was sleek and elegant, marble pillars, dimmed chandeliers, and rows of carefully spaced leather seats. The crowd was smaller, but heavier with influence, journalists, philanthropists, entertainment lawyers, and a few well-known civil rights advocates. When Malcolm entered, the coordinator at the door smiled warmly. "Mr. Rivers, we're so glad you came." He was ushered to the front row, where a reserved card read, "Malcolm Rivers, investor and cultural contributor." The title made him flinch slightly. He hadn't wanted credit. But he accepted it. Halfway through the evening, before the film began, a representative from the production stood up to give brief remarks. He spoke about community, identity, and the importance of representation in both art and real life. Then he paused. Looked directly at Malcolm. "And sometimes," he said, "the greatest acts of leadership happen not on battlefields or behind podiums, but in theater seats, in the quiet, with cameras rolling, and popcorn falling." A ripple of quiet laughter followed. Not mocking, understanding. Malcolm stood briefly and nodded. The room applauded. It wasn't thunderous. But it was real. The following week, Malcolm received an official invitation to speak, not to the media, not to influencers, but to a local high school in downtown Atlanta. One of the school counselors had seen the viral video and emailed him personally. "Our students don't need more celebrities. They need real people who know what it's like to stay calm in the fire. We'd be honored if you came." He didn't hesitate. The school auditorium was modest, creaky bleachers, dusty stage lights, but packed to the walls with students. Some wore uniforms, others hoodies and jeans. A few had their phones out, filming already. When Malcolm took the microphone, he didn't start with the incident. He didn't mention Karen. He didn't mention popcorn. He told them about his upbringing. About being mistaken for a threat at age 12. About learning the difference between silence and submission. About choosing calm not because it's easy, but because sometimes it's the only language people understand. "Every day, you'll be tempted to react," he said. "But every reaction is a transaction. Make sure what you're paying is worth the receipt." The auditorium went still. And when he finished, the applause was long and full, not for a viral moment, but for a man who had turned humiliation into honor. Back at Prime Vista, the seat labeled F7 now bore a tiny plaque on the backrest. It read simply, "Reserved for dignity." And it stayed that way. Because while Karen had vanished from social media, her story hadn't disappeared. It had transformed, from a petty act of racism to a cultural case study. University panels debated it. Ethics professors cited it. The theater chain even created a mandatory bias training program for staff, inspired by what had happened in Theater 6. Malcolm watched it all from a distance. He didn't need revenge. He'd already won. And quietly, irrevocably, the world had shifted. Weeks passed, and the world, as it always does, moved on to the next trending moment. A celebrity scandal. A political controversy. A viral dance challenge. But in Atlanta, and especially inside the walls of Prime Vista cinemas, the name Malcolm Rivers hadn't faded. It had settled. Deep. Like a stone at the bottom of a river, steady beneath the current. Seat F7 became a kind of quiet shrine, not gaudy, not advertised, but respected. Ushers knew not to assign it to anyone without checking twice. Managers nodded when they passed it. And on more than one occasion, patrons requested the seat just to say they'd sat where that guy had once shown what real strength looked like. Malcolm, however, didn't return for fanfare. He came occasionally, with family, sometimes alone. Always with purpose. Never with noise. But the world had plans for more. One morning, he received a letter. A real one, not an email, not a text. Heavy envelope. Embossed seal. A return address from Washington, D.C. He opened it at his kitchen counter, the hum of the kettle filling the silence. Inside was an invitation, a formal one. Mr. Malcolm Rivers. We would be honored by your presence at the upcoming National Dialogue on Public Perception and Implicit Bias, hosted at the Library of Congress. Your story has resonated across political and cultural boundaries. We believe your voice adds clarity where noise too often prevails. Respectfully. The Committee on Civic Discourse and Justice. He stared at it for a long moment. Malcolm didn't consider himself an activist. He wasn't a speaker. He hadn't trained in law or civil rights. He had no PhD, no organization behind his name. He was just a man who bought a movie ticket. Who sat down. Who stayed still when someone else tried to provoke the worst in him. But perhaps, he thought, that was exactly why they needed him. He accepted. At the event, Malcolm found himself among scholars, authors, senators, and celebrities who had spent decades dissecting justice, racism, and the weaponization of bias. The auditorium was packed. C-SPAN cameras rolled. The room buzzed with formality and expectation. When his name was called, Malcolm walked to the stage, adjusted the mic, and looked out across the sea of faces. For a moment, he said nothing. Then. I never wanted to be a symbol, he began. I just wanted to watch a movie. A few in the audience chuckled softly. But sometimes the story you came to see gets interrupted. And suddenly, you're the one in it. And it's not fiction anymore. It's not 3D or surround sound. It's your dignity. Your name. Your safety. He paused. There are people in this country who have never been asked what it feels like to be accused just for standing still. I'm not here because I shouted. I'm here because I didn't. The room hushed. I've learned something. You don't have to flip tables or raise your fists to hold power. Sometimes power looks like stillness. Sometimes power is the moment you choose not to be who they expect. He didn't speak long. He didn't need to. When he stepped away from the podium, the applause was not polite. It was thunderous. Back in Atlanta, Karen's story took a different arc. She tried to lay low. Deleted all her accounts. Switched jobs. There were rumors she had even moved to a different state, pulled her son from his private school, and filed quiet complaints about cancel culture ruining her life. But what Karen never understood, and maybe still didn't, was this. It wasn't culture that had caught up with her. It was accountability. She had built her identity on assumed superiority, a belief that a sob, a scream, and a lie could always shield her. That no one would question her narrative because of how she looked, how she dressed, and what side of town she came from. But the world had changed. People were filming now. And more importantly, people were watching. One night, nearly 2 months after it all began, Malcolm sat again in F7. This time alone. No nieces. No press. Just him and a science fiction film he'd helped bring to life. Halfway through, someone quietly slid into the seat beside him, a woman in her mid-50s. Familiar glasses. Gray cardigan. The woman from F5. She smiled gently. I just wanted to say thank you, she whispered. For what? For showing me that I was braver than I thought. I'd never spoken up like that before. I always told myself someone else would do it. But that night, you reminded me I could. Malcolm didn't respond right away. But when he did, it was simple. That's how change starts. One person choosing not to look away. The film continued. On screen, a hero stood alone against impossible odds. But in the quiet of Theater 6, two ordinary people, who had refused to be silent, watched with the calm pride of knowing they had already played their part. By the time spring rolled into Atlanta, the heat softened and the city carried on, bustling with new distractions, fresh dramas, and different headlines. The world, as always, moved fast. But within certain circles, from schools to boardrooms, churches to courtrooms, the story of the man in seat F7 still echoed. It had taken on a life of its own, not because Malcolm had pushed it forward, but because others wouldn't let it be forgotten. Across the country, that now viral video had been shown in training seminars, ethics classes, and diversity workshops. It was dissected on podcasts and college panels. But perhaps the most profound impact came not from the institutions, but from the individuals who quietly changed how they moved through the world after watching it. Malcolm had no idea how many minds he'd shifted. And he wasn't trying to count. One Saturday morning, as he walked through the campus of a local community college, a young man jogged to catch up with him. "Sir, Mr. Rivers." Malcolm stopped. The student was maybe 20, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and eyes brimming with that quiet urgency that comes from carrying something unspoken for too long. I saw the video. In my sociology class." Malcolm offered a nod. "It made me call my dad," the student continued. "We hadn't spoken in 6 years. He left. Said he didn't know how to be a father. But when I saw how you handled that moment, the restraint, the dignity, I thought maybe I should give him a second chance. That maybe men like him, like us, could still be something good." Malcolm's gaze didn't waver. "I'm glad you called him." The student nodded, lips pressing into a shaky smile. "He didn't pick up," he admitted. "But I'm gonna try again." As the young man turned and walked off, Malcolm stood for a moment in the morning sun, humbled by a truth more lasting than any viral clip. Sometimes justice isn't a gavel. It's a seed. Quiet. Unseen. Waiting for the right heart to bloom in. Later that night, as dusk painted the sky in soft orange hues, Malcolm returned once again to Prime Vista Cinemas. But this time, he didn't come for a film. He came because he had been asked to speak at a private event hosted in the theater lobby, a new initiative by the cinema called Story Seats, a program inviting community members to share personal stories where truth collided with prejudice, and how they responded. Malcolm was the inaugural speaker. Under soft chandeliers and a temporary stage between the snack counter and the arcade, a small crowd gathered. Teens, elders, parents, students, even some of the same staff from the night everything changed. Malcolm stood at the podium, no notes in hand. "I didn't fight back that night," he began, "because I was afraid of what it would cost. Not to me, but to every young black boy who might be watching." He glanced around, voice steady. "What Karen tried to do to me wasn't new. It wasn't even shocking. What was different was that she failed." He paused. "Not for drama. For truth. She failed because people saw. Not just with their eyes, but with their courage." A woman in F5 spoke up. A teenager in F9 recorded. A manager checked the footage. That's what real allyship looks like. Quiet. Immediate. Unshakable. He looked toward the back, where two ushers, one of whom had helped clean the popcorn from his hair that night, stood with folded arms, nodding. "And now," he continued, "this seat behind me, F7, it isn't mine. It's yours. It's a reminder. That when you're sitting there, and someone's being treated like they don't belong, you don't have to raise your voice to be powerful." He smiled. "You just have to stay seated in the truth." The crowd applauded softly but with feeling. A few wiped away tears. One woman approached afterward and hugged him wordlessly. Another shook his hand and simply said, "Thank you for not letting anger win." What began as a quiet night at the movies turned into a national conversation, not because of a viral clip, but because of the man who stayed calm when the world tried to provoke him into becoming a stereotype. Malcolm Rivers didn't ask to be a hero. But he reminded us all what true strength looks like in the face of false accusation. As he once told his niece, "Sweetheart, we're already in the movie. Every day. The question is, what role will we play?" Thank you for watching today's story on True Echo, where we amplify the voices too often left unheard. If Malcolm's story moved you, share it. Let it be the spark that starts a conversation in your home, classroom, or workplace. We need more stories like this, not because they're rare, but because they're real. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate quiet power.